Everybody, welcome back to the Insiders Lounge. We're on the road today. I'm in New York City. I took a flight on Monday, so a little bit of a janky setup, but it's okay. We're rolling. So first of all, I want to say, Natalie, thank you for joining us. If we can get a
Of
quick
course, happy.
introduction, and then we'll kick things off.
All right. Hi, I'm Natalie Marx. I'm 24. I'm a FIFA licensed agent and a PFSA certified scout, and the very proud coach of a U10 girls team.
I love it. We were just talking about it before. It's always exciting to have sort of, for me, getting into the industry. It's always about finding your pathway, and for you, it's been cool to see you're sort of approaching it at multiple angles and getting good info from sort of all different sides of the industry. So it's always nice to see. But first, let's get into your first memories of football. What were your first memories around the game? Was it a World Cup or maybe playing at a young age? But let's hear it. The first memories of the football industry.
I think maybe not my first, but definitely the strongest would be the 2014 World Cup. I remember just after school, um, after practice, I would go to my friend's house because we all lived in like the same neighborhood, and we'd watch the games, and we'd run to our local convenience store or grab like a slushie or like an ice cream, run back, watch the next game. After that, we'd take a break, we'd go kick the ball around, come back inside, watch another game. And I remember the Nike ad at the time was like the winner stays one, which is kind of weird
Mm.
to have a favorite ad, but that is one of my favorite advertisements of all time. And the song in the background was called Miss Alyssa, and one of our friends' mom's name was Melissa, so we would sing it to her like, "Oh, Miss Melissa, ow!" like that, which I'm sure drove her a little bit crazy, but it was just such a fun memory for me. I think another one of my strongest ones would probably be on. Actually, I had the privilege to go on a mission trip to Belize with my old club coach. She runs this program that goes down. We bring boots, jerseys, just other equipment for kids down there at this school, and we also go in and help tutor them. So I was in the group that was kind of tutoring and coaching, just because I had some coaching experience and I had good grades in English class. So I was paired up with one of these little girls who was so adorable. She was so sweet, but she just didn't really seem that interested in like what we were doing in the classroom, like what I was trying to teach her, just the alphabet, stuff like that. So I tried to give her fun games to get her engaged, but it was still a little bit hard. But after school at the football program that we were running, she was so passionate and engaged with everything. So I was one of her coaches, and she'd show up early every day, like, "Hi, Coach Natalie." I'd be like, "Hi, Lena." And she would ask me to do like a 1v1 with her, like a third grader. I'm like, okay, sure. So every day of football, I would teach her a new move, be it like step over or like a Cruyff or a croqueta, Beckenbauer, like whatever it was. And she would like practice it on me. And I noticed that through the week, the more we did football together, the better she did in her classes and in tutoring. She seemed more and more engaged with every day. And at the end of the month that I was there, I'm very proud to say that her teacher no longer sent her because her grades had improved so much. But I really believe that without being able to connect with her through football, I wouldn't have been able to connect with her through academics as well. So it's just kind of something that made me feel very grateful to the game as well. Just being able to connect with this child and help her help herself through our mutual love of football and earning her trust with that. So that's just kind of two moments that just brought me just such joy in regards to the game like that.
I would say both kind of remind me of like the nostalgia around the game, like especially those Nike ads back in the day. I remember those, just watching them, and I was like, I want to be a part of the game. Like I want to run into Ronaldo and become him, or like something like that. Like it was always
When he was
a
just
cool
this guy
fascination.
in the street, right? In the
Yeah.
freestyle, these ads too.
Getting into, I want before we, so around the episode, we're obviously going to dive into the Japanese football world, the entirety of it. I know you've had experience traveling there, kind of working in the industry, and really getting to understand it. But first, I want to get just a little bit of your background so the audience can kind of know who we're talking to, who Natalie is, and then we'll get into more of the Japanese side of things.
All right. So, in relation to football and being an agent, or just in
Yeah, yeah.
general? All right. So, the story of how I got involved in Japan and becoming an agent are very closely intertwined. So, the school I went to had a bunch of Japanese exchange students who came over through this agency, mostly to play, but also to study, exchange. And I was able to kind of like bond with them because I knew a little bit of Japanese through my brother. And so, like, oh, we can exchange 2, 3 words at a time. We're friends now. But we would train together, and I found that some of them were struggling in English class. So since I already had some experience with tutoring, I decided to help tutor and just offer my services like that. And another student came over during the summer league to just play with some of those guys. And he really loved the area, and he loved the team, and he loved the other guys on the team. And he asked me for help if I could help him transfer from his school to the school that I had gone to. And it was a little bit of an issue because they were in the same division and the same, not the same conference, but the same league. And he didn't really know the eligibility rules about that. So I made the phone calls to the NJCAA, to his school, the sporting directors of both schools, and just kind of worked that out, got him that information, helped him get that transfer through. And he was able to transfer, and he started and played every game that next season, which just made me feel so proud of him, but also proud of myself for like, wow, I really helped this kid get from this here to here, and now he's able to play at nationals and all this stuff. Just really fun to watch, and it makes you feel good. But it made me also think, what if I could do this full time? What if this could be something that I do as a job? And I decided if that's a path that I really wanted to pursue, that I would definitely need to do more research on that. So I reached out to the agency that sent all these kids over and began to get a little bit more involved with them. And that winter, I actually was able to go to Japan, visit their headquarters, meet the CEO, all the workers there. And I was actually given the opportunity to speak at a school, like a high school, to all these little college or these little high school boys, talking about American collegiate soccer and the differences, what America is like, what the game is like here. And it just solidified my goal. Like, this is what I want to do. These kids want to go see the world. They want to see a different country. I think that's so cool and brave of them. And I'd want to be someone who helps them do that. So I came back, and one of the tutors, or one of the kids that I had tutored previously, asked if I could drive them to a tryout. Didn't have a car. So I said, sure, why not? It was for a USL championship team. So it'd be a great opportunity for me to meet professional coaches, professional players, agents as well, and just kind of start networking, asking questions. How does this work? What's this process like? I had no prior experience to it before that collegiate example, which again is just NJCAA. I did end up meeting another agent, and I kind of asked him about what that path was like, what that looks like, what are the qualifications required. And he just told me, well, it used to be like this big application and these other things, but now FIFA's changed it, and it's going to be an agent licensing exam that they used to do back in the day, discontinued it, but now they're starting it back up again. So that same day I went home, signed up to take it, and started studying because I was like, all right, this is it. Got the next goal. A couple weeks later, I got approved to take the exam, and I actually remember doing like a little victory dance in a Starbucks line about it. I'm sure the barista thought I was crazy, but I was just so excited that I was going to get the opportunity to take this test. And then I had about 3 months to study for it from the time that I applied to take it to the actual test date. My dad flew with me to Chicago because my mom was nervous about letting me go by myself. And my father has always supported me through all of my adventures in football, every game, every practice, every tournament, away, home, whatever. So it did mean a lot that he was able to come with me here as well. I went, I took the exam, and I found that actually the thought of taking the exam was significantly scarier than the actual exam, which was a bit of a relief. But went home, I waited that agonizing week and one day, and then finally got the acceptance email and started working at an agency for another man that I'd met also taking the exam. And then this past winter, I was able to go back to Japan again, and with the same agency, I was able to go to a large-scale tryout with a bunch of American coaches and high school students who were looking to go transfer to play at college in America. I was able to go to a J3 practice, the first practice of the season, which was in January, and the final of the winter national tournament, which was super exciting and such a fun game. It ended 3-1 Aomori. And it was also fun because I had no players from both sides. So hearing them trash talk each other was kind of fun for the alumni. And I also was able to meet a couple of agents there. So several FIFA licensed agents who were from Japan. And we just spoke about the JFA and FIFA as a whole and like the new changes that were happening. And it was really fun and interesting to hear their experiences and their interpretations of it and how it's affecting them and their business in Japan as opposed to the United States or Europe or anywhere else, as well as some of the lawsuits that have been coming FIFA's way talking about lobbying, JFA, so on and so forth. But that was just such an incredible experience. But what really piqued my interest in Japanese players as a whole, too, was seeing them on my college teams and how quickly they became the center of that team. And I know it's a smaller scale example, it's just a college team, but still, it seemed to be a universal truth for many of the college teams that these players would go to, where the player would become the heartbeat of the team. They would build around that player. They would be such a dependable, well-liked, hardworking player. Coaches would love them. Teammates would love them. And being able to go to Japan and see how those players are developed, all the way from the youth system and the infrastructure there to the professional practices and how that compares to the pro practices I've seen here, it just really made me fall in love with that style. And I do feel like Japan's future in football is incredibly bright, and I'd just like to do what I can to help it shine brighter, I guess.
Yeah, you spoke a lot about your experiences in Japan and the amount of time you'd be able to spend there. One of the first questions I had were the big cultural differences just in the overall culture of Japan versus, let's say, the US or the Western side of the world, but also within football. I'm sure you've been able to see the interesting culture displays in Japan itself. So I would love to hear kind of both sides if you could.
Yeah, so I mean, to compare Japan and the West, it's almost like different worlds, and it's almost a little bit hard to put into words, but I'll do my best on this one. So we can just start with the players and their reputations. Japanese players are known as very versatile, technical, and hardworking players, and those aren't undeserved reputations by any means. But to get into it, you might want to look at how the players are developed within the context of that culture, within the footballing infrastructure, and the overall societal differences that contribute to that. So from a very, very young age, like the first years that you begin playing, coaches will emphasize the individual skills like dribbling, juggling, things that you can practice at home by yourself, just uniball. And that encourages the technical development of the kids more so than just worrying about kind of how we do here with our kids, like, all right, let's do box drill, let's go. And like I'm sure every American kid will know exactly what I mean by that, or maybe anyone in the world. But in addition to that technical emphasis, the children also play on a mix of clay and gravel for the fields, which is a very quick surface. So when you have the combination of the coaches encouraging the technical trainings on such a fast surface, there's almost no choice but to improve because all of your practices, all of your games are played on that surface. If you can't adequately control the ball on that surface, you cannot play football at that level, just because it'll get away from you. You won't be able to see the field anymore because you won't be able to control it. And that technical ability is only further developed the higher up you go. So the junior youth teams, the academies, the high schools, they will further develop that technical ability along with the team skills required. But that technical ability also lends to the versatility of those players. When you do have such a good foundation for that, it's easier for you to integrate into different positions. And another kind of going in a different direction, cultural difference, although I suppose difference isn't the right word, it would be more variance, is the intersection of sports and religion in Japan. I know that kind of everywhere, when your team's down, you start praying. When you've got the last minute PK, please don't let him miss like that. I've been in that position myself. I even remember growing up in the United States, we'd go to church on Sunday from time to time, and Super Bowl Sunday, the city where I live, one of those teams was in the Super Bowl. And we went to church that day, as did everyone else in the community, it seemed. And I remember the Father Sam going, like, all right, and now let us pray for ourselves, our neighbors, and also for the Baltimore Ravens, who will be playing the San Francisco 49ers later tonight. All right, let us pray. And, like, people are laughing and stuff, but they did it. I did it. I thought that I, had to. I was like, oh, all right, that's what we're doing today, for sure. But it's just so fun to see how different cultures and different religions will carry that out. In Japan, the main two religions are Shintoism and Buddhism, and many people practice a kind of a blend of both Shinto Buddhism. And I remember going to a football shop in Saitama, and I was checking out, I got these sweet new Mizuno boots, and I caught my eye in the corner. There was a kamidana, which is a household shrine, or for like a business, and the deity that was enshrined in the kamidana was Leo Messi. And underneath it, there are all these emma, which are these like prayer boards. You write down what you're wishing for, you're hoping for, and you hang it up, and the spirit will see it, hopefully grant it. And so many of them were like, I want to perform well at high school nationals. I want to have a good performance. I want these coaches to notice me. I want my team to win. And just the passion that people have all over the world for this game and how it goes through religion and in that context. And I just think that that's something that's so interesting to me, just with my own personal background in archaeology and all that.
No, that's fascinating. I've never heard of that before. You were speaking there on the high school side, and I know in the past we've been able to speak so much on the high school versus academy side in Japan, which is obviously one of the only countries where both of them are at such a high level, and really you can sort of choose either pathway. So I wanted to get into that first as we sort of move through the development pathway. I want to know the differences, and if you can just explain, if someone had no idea about Japanese football and kind of the youth academy level, I would love for you to explain kind of the differences between high school, between academy, and maybe why one player would choose one pathway versus the other.
Yeah, for sure. So, like you said, high school and academy are the two main pathways, but they are so different from what we see here. The best way to imagine it from an American perspective would be college football or college soccer drawing college football crowds. And a good example of that would be within the high school, the winter national finals just this past winter drew 55,000 people to the national stadium. It's huge. It's so popular. The league structure is also a bit different where academies and high schools will play each other. So at the top, you have the Premier League split into East and West, Prince Leagues 1 and 2 split in between the 9 regions, which I can get this: Hokkaido, Tohoku, Kanto, Hokushinetsu, Tokai, Kansai, Chigoku, Shikoku, and Kyushu. Got it.
Nailed it.
And then the state leagues 1, 2, and 3, which are further split into the 47 prefectures, which I will not name right now.
Fair enough.
These
Fair
leagues
enough.
also, yes, these leagues also have promotion and relegation, which is something that I think is so unique in such like a youth level, as well as the middle schools will have that and the colleges. All of these leagues will have promotion and relegation. So to get into which one is better, kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you want more freedom to choose the team, or if you want that priority look, academies will most often, almost always, get that first look when a club is looking to expand their roster, just because the players already been within the system, the coaches know them, the players know them. But high schoolers might get more freedom to choose, all right, well, now all these teams might be looking at me depending on my performance. The typical academy path would start with junior youth, either through an invite or through an open trial, but it is considered extraordinarily difficult to get in since it is such a desirable position. There's only one team per age group, although it's not at all unusual for a player to get pulled up should they have the sufficient quality and skills. And even in some cases, you might get pulled up to play with the top team without even having to have a professional contract. So it's called a special roster spot. And a good example of this would be a player who actually committed to, I believe, Marshall University this past spring. He played for the Omer Ardija Academy, and then he got pulled up in a special roster spot to play with their first team. He scored a professional goal, actually a game winner. But because he wasn't getting paid, he had no official contract, he was still considered an academy player. He's able to retain that eligibility and come over here and play, which I think is a very cool thing to have. Academy players definitely get professional treatment, and it's more of a meritocracy than their high school with the Senko culture of their counterparts. It's considered more organized, more technically skilled, and that's as a benefit from the professional coaches and being able to stay as a team unit for such a long time. In addition to that, some academies will even get professional trainers, nutritionists, and other such connections just to ensure a good club upbringing, if you want to even say it like that. Now, high school, on the other side, is definitely nothing like what we see here. I remember my high school days where we would get maybe some of the parents to come watch us play. But like I said, the Winter National Tournament drew 55,000 people to the National Stadium, and the average J1 attendance is 18,000. Just for context, I don't know any youth football games in the U.S. that's drawing 55,000 fans. But people will
Yeah,
watch
that's
it, and then they'll
crazy.
watch it from home too. You'll have thousands of people watching it on TV all over the country. And another way to kind of draw a comparison between Japan and the United States would be the way that the players choose these schools It's a lot more similar to our collegiate system than our high school system. Players will travel across the country, they'll get room and board, some will even get scholarships to play for these schools. And it's very intense. There'll be upwards of 150 players on one team or on one school, split between several teams between those aforementioned leagues as well. So the level of competition is extremely high. You are always fighting against someone. You could see the guy who's coming to take your spot too. And because of that, high school players kind of have a reputation for being a little bit more scrappy. They have a little bit more physicality than some of their academy counterparts. And some schools will even recruit specific styles. I know of one school in particular where this is a very prominent example, Seiwa Gakuen, who's very well known for their dribbling skills and their technical ability. So they'll recruit players who fit that mold and then continue to develop them within that school-specific style. They play year-round in a summer and winter nationals. So the winter is winter nationals, summer is inter-high. I always mix that one up. And all of these games are played in professional stadiums, with the final always being held in the National Stadium in Tokyo. So it's kind of just a little rundown on those.
Yeah, no, that helps. It's great. One question I had while listening to that, is there a priority on education in Japan for young kids and students as a whole? Like, I know in the American culture, you have parents really wanting their kids to go to college, to go to university, but like, let's say in the European side of things, it's not really as much of a priority when you're in an academy to necessarily move on with your education post high school or GCSE. So what would you say it's more like the European side where education isn't as important, or more of like the North American side where it's kind of a priority to become educated?
I would say it's more like the North American side where education is a priority. I mean, even if on the academy side, you must be enrolled in a school. Some academies will have a school where they say you must go here, or you can choose your own, whatever's more logistically convenient, I suppose. But the college system in Japan is also so robust and so good. Even recently in this Emperor's Cup, I believe that yesterday, Tsukuba University beat Machida Zavia, who's currently in first place in the J League, on penalties in the Emperor's Cup. College is very much a viable path to professional football in Japan. So being able to get the good grades, because the good schools also have the good teams. Meiji University is a fantastic school, and it also has a very good team. Same with Waseda, same with Tsukuba as well. So education is very, very important, because I think there's also the emphasis of, okay, what next? What after? You've torn your ACL. What's next? You broke your leg, shattered in 3 pieces. Now what will you do? You have to have a backup plan, and I think that's something that a lot of parents will emphasize for their children, at least in the players that I've talked to and the parents that I've spoken with as well.
We had a meeting yesterday here with some of the academy directors, and we were kind of speaking on the difference between promotion, relegation, and more of the North American system where you don't have it at all in pretty much any of the leagues. And so I want to know I think we mentioned on the youth side that there's also promotion and relegation in Japan with the youth side as well as the pro side. I want to know the differences in development. Like, do you notice a difference where players are sort of put under a different pressure, and that kind of helps refine the real diamonds from the rest? Do you notice those differences?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, promotion and relegation in this youth system would serve the same purpose as it would in any developed league, where it adds the competitiveness, it adds the intensity and importance to all of these games. And in particular, with the way that the promotion and relegation is structured on the youth side in Japan, there's almost an added level of uncertainty. So I'll kind of take you through that real quick, and that might clear up on its own. But we'll start top to bottom. So every year, 4 teams are relegated from the Premier League, 2 from the East, 2 from the West. So 4 teams will also be promoted. Both leagues have to have 10 teams. So in the event that, say, East has 11 teams, the team that's furthest to the West would be pushed to Premier League West to maintain the proper numbers. And that actually happened to a school from Yokohama last year. So for Prince 1 to the Premier League, the top 2 teams from Prince 1 from every region will go to playoffs. However, since some regions are considered particularly strong, they're able to send 3 teams. One possibility is that all 3 of those teams will win playoffs and go to the Premier League, which means that the bottom 3 teams don't get relegated and 3 new teams will be promoted. And in the event that those 3 teams can't win playoffs and get promoted, then the bottom 3 teams in Prince will go down. So the amount of teams relegated depends on the amount of teams promoted from Prince 1 to the Premier League. And then in Prince 2, teams get relegated every year. But again, the amount of teams promoted depends on the amount of teams promoted in the other league. So because of that, you don't actually quite know if your team's going to get relegated or not. You could be in the bottom 3, but 3 teams go up, so you stay up. Or you could be in the third one kind of fighting. Those 3 teams stay down, you all go down. And I think that that extra level of uncertainty adds to that intensity and the competitiveness of the players when they're playing in those matches. Every single game matters because you don't know whether you'll get promoted. Even if you're in last place, you might stay up, you might not. Depends on how the guys at the top do as well.
You mentioned earlier, I want to get these names right. So Machida Zelvia, you mentioned the club, obviously, and there's a coach there that's from Amori Yamada. I think I'm saying that right. I know you'll help fix that, but I want to get into that story of his coaching career and kind of the team itself, because I found it fascinating when you first told me.
Yeah, of course. So the story of Kurarago has been one of definite interest within the Japanese footballing community. We'll start at the very beginning with that. So he left behind his job in the hotel business back in like 94, 95 to coach at this small high school at this very northern point in Japan that sees like 26 feet of snow every year and has no history of winning. And he took them and turned them into an absolute powerhouse of a school. They have won like the high school national tournaments 4 times, appeared in the finals 5 times, have appeared in every national tournament every year since 1997, and won the Prince Takamado Cup 3 times. And I'll explain that one very briefly. The Prince Takamado Cup would be the cup for the Premier Leagues. So the best young team in Japan, including the academies, including the high schools. They've won that 3 times. And so he was first appointed to Machida Zelvia at the end of 2022 with some very mixed reactions. People thinking, okay, well, he's only coached at high school. Yeah, he's done well, but it's just high school. He's never coached professionally. He's never played professionally. Like, we're just not sure. And he was very quick to silence those doubts. He finished over 10 points clear of the top of the table with a team that finished 15th last season and helped Zelvia become promoted to the J1 League for the first time in the club's history. And then, even then, there was still some, okay, well, J2, he got us promoted, that's great, but J1, that's different. Like you have those monsters up there. And once again, he was very quick to silence those doubters again. So Machida Zelvia is currently in first place in the J League in their first ever season there, with a coach who's only in his second ever professional season coaching. So they're really on track to win the J1 in their first ever season, which I think is incredible Cinderella story. And right now, I believe they're only a couple points ahead of Kashima Antlers, but tied on like wins, draws, losses, and I think maybe goal differential as well. So it's going to be tight, but I think it'd be such a fun ending for that season to have that really just fairy tale dream for the team, their fans, and just the whole area.
We'll speak more about the professional side in a little bit here, but before we move on from high school, I wanted to know we spoke about some of the cultural and traditions in the high school levels that I thought were quite unique that I've never heard before. So can we dive into those?
Yeah, of course. So I think one of the most interesting things about the high school culture, even just opposed to academy and other things, but encompassing Japanese sports as a whole, would be senpai kohai culture, which senpai would be upperclassmen, kohai underclassmen. High school in Japan is 3 years, so the third years, they have no senpai, they have 2 kohai. Second years, they have the senior senpai, freshman kohai. Freshmen, they only have senpai. So that seniority is taken very seriously in Japan as well, to the point where sometimes kohai are even expected to act like field hands. I was speaking to a coach from Japan who told me a story about how kohai had to get to practice early, set up the field for the upperclassmen, practice on a side field, break down the field after practice, clean up the seniors' locker rooms, sometimes even cleaning their boots, and then they're allowed to go home. And that's just on the field. Off the field, too, it's very prevalent as well. So in classes and hallways, even outside on the street, you have to bow and greet your senpai. Whenever you see them, some students will take it very seriously, like, hey, you're not gonna greet me? Some kind of say, oh, no, it's fine. But regardless, it's still expected to be done. And even within the top teams and at the higher level, so a freshman on the top team, I heard a story of where one freshman went on a travel, like away trip with the top team and had to do everyone's laundry for them. So senpai kohai culture is huge. And then to add into the fact that the teams in high school are also so huge, you have 150 guys for one program. It definitely adds to that scrappy reputation. You have to fight for your spot. You had to learn to respect your elders. You had to be much more responsible than maybe you might have expected to have had to have been. Like, not only are you cleaning up your own stuff, you're cleaning up everyone else's stuff as well. And that discipline, responsibility, and scrappiness has become prevalent in that reputation for them. And of course, there are exceptions to this. Not every school will adhere so strictly, but I think any player who has played in high school in Japan in any sport would be able to have at least some story or experience with this type of culture.
So we've been discussing kind of the high school side. I want to move on to more of the professional side of things. So you've obviously been able to analyze professional soccer and all levels of soccer in Japan for a few months to a few years now. So you've been able to see some growth and some changes. So I'm curious, what developments have you seen over the years, maybe even in the past as well, historically speaking? I would love to know some of the differences and why Japanese soccer has become so successful.
Of course. So I actually used to major in archaeology, so I will absolutely take you through the history of this one real quick. So to start at the beginning, the first ever match was played in like 1870s between sailors, English teachers, and their students in Kobe. And I'm sure to any onlooker, it probably looked very similar to kamari, which is a kind of a Shinto version of hacky sack, to put it undelicately. The first official match was played a couple years later at the Tokyo Bay Naval Academy between some of the Japanese Navy students who were studying there and some of the British players, organized by this British officer named Archibald Douglas, who was actually there to help instruct, develop, and help plan Japan's first major overseas naval activity, which they pulled off a couple years later. So for fast forwarding a couple years to the birth of the J-League, we can't include this without also mentioning the popularity of baseball. Baseball was by far the number one sport in Japan, and for good reason. They're very good at it. But many of the teams were privately owned, which was the same case with the football league at the time. So, for example, you'd have teams called Nissan Motors, you'd have the Mitsubishi team. They'd all be sponsored teams, which, it's great you have the company support. However, if the company takes a hit, then the team will also take a hit. So a company might have to shut down, teams disbanded, so then people are losing jobs, both on and off whatever workforce you're doing, and you're losing the fans, the city loses a team. So the J-League decided to tie the clubs to the cities to help build that sense of community and almost ownership for the fans and the team to be like, all right, we're all part of this together. So Nissan Motors became Yokohama F. Marinos, and all of these teams ended up renaming, so there were no more sponsor names. They were tied to the cities, and that's part of the reasons why J-League teams tend to have such fun names, like Jubileo Iwata or Urawa Red Diamonds. Some of them are homages to their former sponsors, so Red Diamonds, Mitsubishi, you can make that connection there. Some are just taking words from other languages that just connect with the city. Albirex Niigata, you've got the motif and the crest that matches it. I think it's kind of fun to look into the etymology of those names as well. But the league is now over 60 teams between 3 leagues in the JFL. And some recent changes would include that there are now 20 teams per league. So at the end of the last season, there was only 1 team relegated from J1 and 3 promoted. And then in the J League, they changed the playoff structure. So now the top 2 teams are automatically promoted, and the next 4 will have a playoff for the final spot. There's also been a couple of rumors of changing the actual league schedule to match the European calendar, but it's been met with a little bit of pushback from fans, clubs, some of the players even too.
Okay. So we've been discussing the professional side of Japanese football and its players, and obviously previously I mentioned how that flow of players from Japan to Europe and even North America as well, you're just seeing it more and more each transfer window as it comes. So I want to know the biggest difficulties that some of the Japanese players face, and then also some of the advantages or the areas and expertise that they're much greater at than some of the European players, as well as the North American side. I would like to see kind of the differences and some of the things you've noticed from your end.
Of course, I think 2 of the biggest things that Japanese players will struggle with, whether you're 18 or 28, coming over to Europe, would be the language barrier and the physicality. So, with exception, Japanese players tend to be on the smaller side, and that's not a bad thing by any stretch, but it is a hard jump to make when coming up against very large players that you're not used to. When previously your center backs have been 5'10", maybe 6 foot, now they're going to be 6'4", occasionally 6'5". It's a big difference, and it does change the way that you have to approach the game and approach the defenders as a whole. They have different weaknesses, they have different strengths. You need to understand that and be able to adapt to it. And of course, it's not impossible. It's not an impossible adjustment to make. Plenty of Japanese players have found success in Europe, and with more to follow. I mean, just think about Kubo, Mitoma, our new recent transfer that we were just talking about before this. There's been such an increasing trend of these players going to Europe, and in particular young players as well, still in their teens, right after high school. And then you hear the whispers at like the high school, like the national tournaments. Oh, did you hear? Number 4, he just signed a contract. He's going to Belgium after this. Like the whispers, like, wow, okay. And I think that part of that is now going to be due to Germany's new visa agreement that allows a much easier transfer of players from select countries, including Japan and the United States, for footballing purposes. I think that these players are going to have a much easier time integrating once they reach the top teams or transfer, just because they've already had so much more experience in their formative years playing against bigger, perhaps even faster players. And they'll just, more time to adjust. But that first jump that they make it's hard mentally. That mental impact should not be left unmentioned. Clubs will hire translators when they bring in a Japanese player, depending on his English level. Usually they'll have players take the TOEFL, the English language proficiency exams, just to see the amount of accommodation that they might need. But for those players who maybe aren't as well versed in English, the translators will help at the club, of course, with communication through the coaches, the players, any other staffers, trainers that they need. But the translators don't follow them home. Of course, I'm sure they'll become friends, but they're not going to live with you. They're not going to go to the grocery store with you. They're not going to be at every cafe with you. They're not going to help you make new friends outside of the club. They won't be there when a fan comes up to you to ask you about your autograph and how you're fitting in with the team and what do you think about the city, any places you like to eat, I really recommend this place. And you're just standing there like, thank you. Because that's all you can do. You aren't able to communicate to the ability that you know you can. But just because it's another language, it almost handicaps you in that regard when it comes to building relationships with others. And that loneliness and isolation that you'll feel off the field and away from the pitch in the club, I think that can't be understated when considering player performance after an international transfer like that. And that weight, that'll take its toll mentally, sometimes even physically, in regards to the ability to perform. On the other side, though, Japanese players have notable technical ability. As we mentioned before, the players have the encouragement of developing their technical skills, but as mentioned with the fact that these players tend to be smaller, it goes unsaid, but it's not misunderstood that if you want to be able to compete with a player who's physically larger or faster than you, then you must be more technical than them. And the technical ability is something that's within the player's control. If you want to work on this, if you want to spend those hours, you will improve. And just doing what you need to do to get to the level where your technical ability will outweigh someone else's height, that's something that I think Japanese players have done very well with. And you can see it easily with the dazzling dribbles we'll see from Mr. Mitoma over in the Premier League, or just the absolute versatility of some of these players. Tomiyasu playing several different positions. And no matter where he plays, you can see, oh, he's got good technical skills. Oh, he looks really comfortable on the ball. And that's true of Japanese players almost wherever they go. Any coach that I've spoken with will say the same thing about the players. Oh, he's really versatile. Oh, he's so hardworking. Oh, he's really comfortable on the ball. Oh, he's got great technical skills. Oh, his distribution's amazing. Very, or just around the board, you hear the same thing time and time again from these coaches. If it's not just one individual player, it must be the system that's working well.
Do you think there's something on I would say it's sort of from all levels, the academy, high school, and professional side in Japan. Do you think there's something that they could do to help the adaptation of those players to the European game?
Yeah, I mean, in schools, English is taught as a second language from a very young age in Japan. So just emphasizing that education. And if you do believe that a transfer to Europe or a transfer to the United States or primarily English speaking country or whatever language that country speaks, I would just take the extra steps to learn it. Some teams will hire private tutors for these players before the transfer, and then once they get there, they'll continue that. So just continuing those programs, but also just if there was a way to find a feeling of community within that new place you're going, finding maybe a family who also moved from Japan maybe a couple years ago, introducing that player. That family and that player will have a lot in common. That's what the agency that I work with in Japan, they'll do that here. They'll find Japanese families in these cities where these schools are and say, look, if you have a problem, if you don't know where to go for grocery shopping, if you've got a question about this, that, or another thing, you call Miss Naomi. She'll pick up the phone. She'll help you out. She's like your mom away from home almost. And sure, maybe it's a bit juvenile if you're like a almost 30-year-old man or something, but the cultural differences between these countries are immense. And having someone there to help you bridge those gaps who understands what you're going through at some level, I believe that would be an immeasurable help for some of these young players in particular.
We discussed in our initial call, we discussed your bold claims about the World Cup for Japan. So I want to hear your thoughts on the national team, sort of the recent performances, but then also what you believe is coming up soon.
Yes, World Cup. So, I mean, my predictions for this next World Cup will be that Japan is going to reach the quarterfinals. I'm feeling it. I'm really hoping for it. And I mean, what that will do for Japan as a whole, I think football and baseball are really neck and neck right now for the most popular sport in the country. And Japan has had great international success with baseball, as evidenced with the last World Series. They won it. I heard a lot about that from my Japanese friends who I talk about baseball with. I'm really hoping that similar international success will push the men's football program even further. So I think we'll see more and more players going to large European clubs. I mean, we've already seen in this past season the movement and introduction of more Japanese players to the top 5 leagues and Champions League teams that we'll see them next season. And the immediate impact that they've had on those teams. I'm hoping for more of that. And my kind of crazy belief is I believe that Japan will be able to win the World Cup within the next 5 cycles. And I'd like to see more people cheering for that.
Brilliant. I love it. It's good to be always good to be bold. It's something that not everyone can agree with, but no, that's an interesting take. I think the five cycles could be something. I also look at the US and I see some of these rising countries with the potential they have. It's inspiring. It's a good story to tell and to be a part of. I want to know, lastly, we spoke a little bit about the future and where you see them on the international stage, but I want to know just in terms of some of the other topics we've mentioned, development, sort of the youth system, and even the professional side. Where do you see the future of Japanese football in the next few years?
I think the common theme, even around the world, seems to be younger and younger professionals, and I think that will hold true in Japan as well. I mean, the example I mentioned earlier with the special roster spot, that one player, he was a senior in high school. He got pulled up to play with the first team. And he's not the only one. There's other players. I'll look at Y Scout when I do my scouting, and I see the birth years, and it's like 04, 04, 04, 06, even like 05, and all these different ages. And it's like, wow, these kids are young. I used to coach a group of high school girls, and it's like, I could have coached you. Kind of like a little like mental thing. But I think we'll continue to see that, as well as the continued transfer of more players to Europe. I'm hoping that maybe we'll get more players transferred to the Americas as well. I think that would be an interesting introduction to see the different adjustments that are made there.
I want to get into, to wrap things up, sort of the Insider's Lounge favorites, we call them, just some questions to get to know you a little bit more. So first things first, I want to know what brings you joy or fulfillment in life, something that's just like a true passion of yours that you enjoy and kind of gets you through some of the tough days.
I've had a lot of joy in meditation recently. So being an agent, you're always on the go. You're always on a call. You're always on a meeting. You're always sending someone some kind of correspondence, or you're traveling to go watch a game. And that is a privilege in itself. Being busy is good business. I'm happy to have it. But it's made me appreciate those quiet moments a little bit more. Sometimes with motivation, it's life. Sometimes it gets you down. But what really kind of like brings me to give my best every single day, you might laugh at me, but do you know those old stories about like how constellations were formed? Like heroes of old performing some legendary task, and whatever god's pantheon the story belonged to would honor those achievements and make them a constellation after they passed away. I thought it was a bit dreamy. I always loved history as a kid, and I always liked the thought of putting in a star in the sky as well. And isn't that in some way the job of an agent, even if that's not a little bit of a reach? We have a hero who's performing incredible feats, so we bring them to new heights where they can become stars that people all over the world get to look up to. It's kind of a juvenile way of putting it, but it's just how I feel. And also seeing Leo Messi in a Kamidana, I think it's a little bit more realistic than I initially thought.
So I always like to know, we've asked this question in the last few episodes. What is your most valuable asset? So a mindset or a skill or a trait you have that you find maybe unique to others and something that's been able to help you advance your career and kind of bring you a new advantage in your industry.
I think my ability to rephrase failure, to put it like that. I obviously, everyone will fail. Everyone will try something and it won't work out. You'll put your best effort to it and it just won't be enough. But to think of that as a total failure, oh, this is the worst, just wallow in that, I think that that's unproductive. Trying to learn from that, figure out where it went wrong. What could you have done differently? Is there anything you could have done differently? Is this dependent on other people or yourself? Being able to break down that situation into all the individual parts and figure out what went wrong the next time you don't make that mistake. And I think being able to break down those failures and rework them into learning experiences has done me a lot of good in this industry in particular, because you hear no a lot more than you hear yes. And that's just part of the game. That's just how it is. And that's also life as a whole. In almost anything, you hear no a lot more than you hear yes. And you just have to accept that, carry on, and figure out a way to get through it. No doesn't mean that you should just give up. It just means you need to find a different path to do it.
Yeah, I like that. You can almost have that as your line for the quote. I wanted to know, you're in your earlier stages of your career, so you got plenty of time ahead of you. But if we look at this conversation, if we sit down again in the next 5 to 10 years, have the same conversation, where do you want to be? Where do you think you'll be? Do you want to be a part of the football industry still? Do you have other dreams and aspirations? I'd love to hear sort of your mindset towards the future.
Yeah, so actually, I've actually decided to go back to school and pursue law. So I'm hoping in 5 to 10 years I'll have passed my SQE 1 and 2 and gotten my qualifying work experience, and I'll be able to work as a solicitor advocate in the United Kingdom, better representing clients working there on and off the football realm, so to speak. But also I find that law is such an interesting topic, and it is so relevant to what we do as agents. So many agents are lawyers, and I feel like there's a good reason for that. So it's something I definitely want to learn more about and just educate myself about. So just again, to better serve my clients.
Yeah, no, that's great. Continuous education. We speak about it a lot with different guests. And I think it's so important to sort of, some people, you'll get to the end of high school or the end of university, and that's sort of where they think the education stops. But I think even as you grow with your age, I think it's so important to continue to learn new things and strive just to kind of find things where you're a little bit uncomfortable, but that means you're learning. And I think that's a great part of it. Yeah, we're speaking about learning. So before we get into the quick fire questions, I want to know, how did you, we missed it at the beginning, but it's all right. Well, how did you get into learning Japanese? What was the kind of the origin story behind that? I know you mentioned some of the players and how you got connected there, but I'd love to hear how you actually learned Japanese.
Of course. So my older brother went to University of South Carolina, and he studied Japanese as his minor, and then he did a gap year at Waseda University in Japan. And like any annoying little sister, I wanted to be just like my brother, so much to his chagrin. I had always also been interested in Japan, so during lockdown, I took my brother's old textbooks and I began teaching myself Japanese, actually. I took myself through the alphabet, hiragana, katakana, began kanji, and started going through the grammar, vocab, all this stuff. And when I got to a certain point, I started reaching out to people through social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, trying to find pen pals, my friends at the school that I'd previously gone to. practicing speaking, practicing writing, asking questions. How would you say this? Is there a slang term for this? Learning all these different like dialects. I think honestly my favorite word in Japanese is kind of like a dialect slang. It's daiji, which is kind of an abbreviated way of saying daijoubu, like okay, you're right, from Tochigi. So perhaps it's a big country, but I like it. And I am still learning Japanese. I'm not fluent, and I wouldn't make that claim, but I am planning on taking the JLPT, the Japanese Language Proficiency Test, and I'm hoping to reach JLPT 1 in the next 2 years. Actually, being able to communicate in Japanese has made such a huge difference when working with Japanese players and teams and so on. I remember I actually went to Skyrim Game here in the United States, and there was a Japanese player who was with the agents, so I thought I'd just go say hi and introduce myself. Started in Japanese. すみません。時間がありますか？はい。はじめまして。私はナタリーです。And that's super basic. It's, excuse me, do you have some time? Okay. Nice to meet you. I'm Natalie. This is a very basic introduction. He looked at me like he had seen a ghost. He like that, which if I was in his position, I would totally understand that. And I think that's a completely fair reaction, but it still makes me like check a little bit. It's being able to communicate and making that effort to communicate with people on their grounds has definitely helped me get a lot more opportunities within Japan and even within the United States market as well. Other agents who are looking to get in, they'll ask me for help with translation, so on, connections. And in Japan, on the flip side, being able to reach out to those players on my own, being able to talk to these coaches, being able to introduce myself, being able to show that I'm putting in the effort to communicate with you on your terms. I think that's gone a very long way. And of course, language is a natural prerequisite for doing business no matter where you are in the world. I feel like almost an unfortunate misconception from particularly Western monolinguals is that they tend to rely on the prevalence of English when conducting business abroad. And like I mentioned earlier, Japan does teach English, but that doesn't mean that everyone learns or practices. I mean, in America, children are similar. We kind of start learning a second language at the latest in middle school, but it's hardly ever retained. And I can really only think of one person I know that can speak comfortably in the language that they started learning in middle school. Linguistic retention is very much a use it or lose it situation. And in Japan, it's 97% ethnically Japanese with less than 1% of any other one ethnicity. So there's just not that many opportunities to use English beyond a select few phrases for some tourists that you might see. Of course, there are exceptions. There are people who speak English from conversational fluency all the way to bilingual fluency. And there are people who have traveled the world and speak so many other languages. But the vast majority is not going to be able to communicate with you on the level required to do in serious business if you're not going to make the effort to either get a translator or pick up the language. So I think it's fair to say if you intend on doing business in Japan, you should start to pick up a few phrases, hire a translator, go out of your way to learn something, make that effort to connect with people on their terms, not your own. And I think that will go a long way with goodwill and so on.
I love it. That's a great way to finish things up here. So we'll get through the quick fire questions and then we'll wrap it up. Do you have a favorite quote or saying, something that you live by or that inspires you?
Yes. Things turn out the best for the people who make the best of the way things turn out, by the immortal coach John Wooden.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't think we've heard that one yet. Next, obviously the episode's been on Japanese football and culture as a whole. So I want to know your top recommendations for Japan, either cities that people have to go see or maybe a type of food or something that just you really recommend to someone that hasn't experienced Japanese culture yet.
I think everyone should try unaju at least once. It's grilled eel with a sweet umami barbecue-like sauce served over rice, and I promise you, it will change your life. Please try it. Whatever you think about eel, you're wrong. Just give it a shot.
Interesting. All right, I've got something to add to the list now. I have to try that out. Do you have a favorite book, something that you're either reading now or just one that you recommend for people?
Yeah, I read this in middle school. I stole it from my dad's library. It's Playing for Pizza by John Grisham. It's a quick read, so if you've ever got like a weekend free, you probably finish it in like a couple days.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one. And the last one here, if you could sit down with one person in the, let's say we can do one with the footballing world and one just in general, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
It would actually be another agent. So I'm kind of a fan of Rafaela Pimenta. I just think she's such an inspiration for young women everywhere, and not just within this profession. Her advocacy for women working in such male-dominated institutions has it's really deeply moved me and even some of my other friends who aren't even in football at all. I've listened to a number of her interviews, some where she recounts the stories of things that have been said to her, and it feels unfortunately familiar, but I just still remember seeing the transfer market agency value rankings like on Instagram when it came up and seeing her name up there in the top 15, right up there with the industry monoliths, not as a part of an organization or some huge agency, but just her name, a woman's name up there with the top 15, the biggest in the world. And it was just such an inspiring sight to see, like, yeah, this is possible. I can live my dreams. She's living them. You can do it. And I just think it'd be so interesting to talk to her, hear her story, hear her journeys, her ups, downs, where she wants to go next with this. It's just such an inspiration.
Natalie, I appreciate your time. It's been a great conversation. I've been enjoying Japanese football and the culture for quite a while, so it's been cool to be able to dive in and get a little bit of a better understanding. If you have any last words, and then we can wrap things up.
No, I just want to thank you for giving me a chance to come on and talk about Japanese football. Always happy to talk about it, and I'm still learning more every day. There's been so many new, interesting developments that I'm looking forward to reading up on and seeing where it goes from here.
Appreciate it. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to speaking again soon.
Of course, same here.